Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're talking about breaking the cycle of how we as adults think about and respond to child behavior. Whether it's a young child who maybe spills their juice or touches things that they've been told not to, or it's a teen skipping school or speaking disrespectfully, the way we as adults respond is rooted in our own childhood experiences, how we were parented, and the models that we've had personally and or professionally for how to handle these challenges with kids. Once we understand these cycles, we can make a more conscious choice about what we want to keep and what we want to change in terms of our understanding and responses. And this gives us a really powerful foundation for truly supporting and meeting the needs of kids in more effective ways. So to help us understand more about these cycles and our role in supporting the behavior of kids, I've invited Mr. Chazz on the show today. Now, some of you may know Mr. Chazz and his work from social media. He's got a huge community of parents and professionals there. For those of you who haven't yet been introduced to him, let me tell you a bit about him. His mission in life is to enjoy the process of becoming the best version of himself and help others do the same. He helps adults see, guide, and trust children. Mr. Chazz is an educational specialist who teaches teachers to teach in a chain of child development centers. He works closely with 8 different schools, hundreds of teachers, and thousands of children. He's trained thousands of teachers in person and virtually and earned his master's in executive leadership at American University. He's in the process of writing a book and has his own podcast called Mr. Chazz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching Podcast. He also coaches people in his Patreon community and individually. I love the information that Mr. Chazz shares online. It's such a pleasure to have him on the show today with us. Welcome, Mr. Chazz.
Thank you. I am happy to be here. I'm happy to have the conversation. I was just, before we even hopped on, had a video kind of in my head that I was going to create that's kind of on my heart. And I feel like it's going to come out in this conversation. So
Awesome.
I'm just excited to talk.
I'm excited about this because I think that so many parents and teachers and therapy professionals, anybody who spends time with kids, this issue of how we respond to children when they're having challenging moments, right? When they're exhibiting behaviors that are anywhere from aggravating to us to really, unsafe and problematic. It's tough for us as adults. And you bring a really helpful perspective to this conversation that I think is important. I'm actually curious to start out with how you got into working with young kids, because certainly you don't fit the mold of who we typically think of going into early childhood education. And so I'm thinking there's got to be a story there, and I'd love to hear how you came to be doing this work.
So, actually the story might surprise a lot of people. When I first started working with children, I really it wasn't like this big, like, oh, I really want to work with children. I was really just looking for a summer job. I was young, I was in college, and my friend had gotten a job at the child care center down the street, and I was looking for a job. So I just applied, and it was really within the first week, really within the first day, I was like, wow, this is actually something that's pretty fun and enjoyable. Like, I actually like kids a lot. And because when I got the job, I didn't even know how much I really enjoyed being like around children, or how much I really like children, until I started to spend some time with them. Like, oh, actually, like, you guys are actually pretty great. Actually, like, I think I could get used to hanging around you guys. Like, I feel like I kind of understand you guys. I understand you a little bit. But then as time progressed and went on, I started to really see the challenges of that children come with, and not really, my perspective had kind of over in that first year really grew to, wow, I really am growing the next generation of humans, and I have a big part to play with that during their formative years, but I don't really know how to do this. I hadn't really been trained or had a lot of education, when I first came into it. And so I struggled, especially when children were in conflict, and I'd go to try to help them, and then it seemed like I would make it worse, or like I wouldn't solve it. And I didn't know if I was making it worse or making it better. And that was really kind of internally painful for me, because again, I understood like the gravity of what I was doing. I didn't know if I was like, messing these kids up. And I started off in a classroom of from 3 to 5 year olds in a
Mm,
Montessori classroom,
mhm,
with 30 children.
mhm.
So that's a lot of children. That's a
Yep.
lot of dynamic. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of things.
Mhm,
Um, and so a lot of like my kind of desire and kind of intrinsic motivation to kind of reach back and help teachers and parents, part of it is like the empathy that I have, because I remember going on break and struggling and
mhm,
crying in the car because I was like I was really struggling and really stressed out
mhm,
by not knowing what to do and
mhm,
feeling like I would may be doing harm.
mhm,
And so as I moved into the position as educational specialist, like my big thing, and anyone who's like worked in like any teacher who's worked in my company has been new, and I've seen them can attest to this, that I really put a big focus on new teachers, because like
mhm,
I remember what it was like to not know, to not have the understanding that I do
mhm,
now.
mhm.
And I just think, wow, like if someone was really mentoring me in those beginning stages, like it would have de-stressed myself a lot. It still would have been stressful because there still would have been a huge learning curve.
Mhm,
Um, but it took time for me to find those mentors and
mhm,
to train with people and to get into read the books and the education, listen to podcasts. All those things took time.
mhm,
And so I really tried to reach out to those new teachers, and really I saw that, and I wasn't really working with parents until the pandemic happened.
mhm,
And it was really kind of what I saw of like the challenge and the struggle. It almost kind of felt like that new teacher
yeah,
kind of feel, because it was just a new situation,
mhm,
that parents didn't know how to handle. And as they were sharing their struggles, I was reading and I was listening. I was like, wow, I can really, there's a lot that I could say and share that could really help these parents in the same way I've been helping teachers.
mhm,
And in me, in my kind of mission in life to enjoy the process, becoming the best version of myself and help others do the same, I kind of found an avenue, a medium through TikTok, because it was
mhm,
like a fun way
mhm.
to, share content, but also educate people and to help people. And so that's why I started on TikTok first, because it just looked really fun and enjoyable. And I saw how people were already kind of starting to learn on it. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how
Mm.
it got started.
I love it. And I really, what resonates with me so much is what you said about that your experience starting out has allowed you to have so much empathy for people who are new to working with children, as well as parents. I have so many parents who've said to me over the years, if my kid just came with an instruction manual, right? Like if there was just something that said, like, here's how you handle this for this kid, here's what you do. And, becoming a parent throws you into this realm where there is no instruction manual and you're figuring it out, and you are unique in yourself, your child is unique, and it can feel like, wow, if I just had some guidance to help me know, am I doing this right, should I be doing this differently? And I remember that as a teacher too. When I started out um, in my career as a teacher, I took a job with kids with more significant autism and emotional and behavioral disorders, little kids. I had absolutely no experience. They really probably should not have given me that job, except that they saw a tenacity in me to figure things out, right? It was sort of like, these are kids that, most people get really distressed about, that people aren't curious about or interested in learning how to work with. And the sort of tenacious, curious part of me really delved into that. And it sounds like for you too, that sort of like, how can I be better at this? And I would go home as well, like you said, like, oh, I don't feel good about how that went. Or,
Yeah.
so and so, that's, the classroom they had me go in to observe, or the thing they had me look at online, or that book, I tried that, but it just didn't resonate with me. And it was really in figuring out my own style through a lot of learning, as you said, like what inherently makes sense to me, and really going back to what is true about child development, what's true about relationships, and sort of, figuring out as I went along. But I love that you are in a role to help people at the start of their career and towards the start of their parenting journey with that, because that support and that modeling is so invaluable.
Yeah. And I want to say, I have a thought here about the instruction manual because that always comes up, right?
Yep.
We just had an instruction manual, a set of directions to do in these different situations, then life would be better. But I actually want to do like almost like a perspective shift on this, that really, even if your child did come with an instruction manual of exactly what you should do in each situation, it would feel and it would be kind of robotic. And I would imagine that whatever instruction manual they came with would be outdated as they're using it because children and people are changing. The instruction manual would have to constantly be changing. And instead of thinking of it as of wanting a set of directions or a script or an instruction manual or formula, thinking of it more like a dance, right? It's more of a dance. And that's all relationships, right? It's more of a meeting between two people whose needs are both important and really kind of figuring each other out. And yes, I would think of it more as like maybe a set of tools, or if we're going to kind of use the dance metaphor, maybe some dance moves to use, right? But it's not plugging in a formula or a script for a specific situation for a child. It is attuning, it is watching, it is observing, it is feeling, and then moving with. And sometimes you're leading and sometimes they're leading. And that's why sometimes it's a little messy and sometimes we step on each other's toes, and because that's what it is, and that's what relationships are, rather than an instruction. Like, imagine too, and let's think about this too. This is a new thought. Imagine if you were entering in a relationship with a new person, and you sort of like them, but they came with an instruction manual. So you're going on a date and you're kind of like reading the instruction manual, or kind of like the classic like sitcom, like cheesy movie kind of thing. There's someone in the ear telling them what to say. Like, it's not authentic, it's not genuine. And as the person senses that that's not really you're not authentically dancing with them, and you're just reading from the instruction manual underneath the table, or just listening to the set of instructions the person who's in your ear, then it kind of disconnects you from that relationship a little bit, and it feels inauthentic and not genuine, which is really important in every relationship.
It's so true. And this beautiful metaphor about a dance, I think that's exactly right. And actually very freeing, because so many parents and professionals get really anxious about knowing how to handle everything that comes up. Will I know what to say? Will I know what to do? I hear that all the time from parents as their kids get into the preteen and teen years. Like, I don't know, like, what will I do? What will I say? And it's like this idea that if you have the foundational steps in place, if you have this relational dance, that's what's going to carry you through. And unfortunately, I don't know if you've seen this, but what I've seen, especially in kids who exhibit more challenging behaviors in school settings or even in home settings, who maybe have diagnosed emotional or behavioral or learning or developmental types of challenges, the way we tend to approach handling those kids, managing those kids, is through this sort of scripted behavior. Like, here's the behavior plan, and step one, this is what you do, and this is what you say, and this is how you respond. And to your point about how, number one, how disconnected and really quite weird that is. And it sort of means that, in school, then we have to have a plan for every single thing that comes up, which you can't, because leave it to kids. They will have the next thing that you have, not even thought of. And I just have seen so many professionals and teams run in circles, chasing these individual behaviors that now they're going to write a plan for and have a script and a consequence and whatever. And it's like, let's just back up and look at the big picture And let's focus on building relationship, and let's focus on what our role is in this dance. And to me, that's where we get, the real effective change.
Yeah. And I get like why that is. And, especially like in a school,
Yeah.
people, higher ups want to, there's accountability or, whatever. There's these different pressures, like you need to do something, you need to have something written out
Yeah.
for legal reasons, whatever. And so like I get why we try to approach it in that manner. And also too, I think part of it may be like even the maybe lack of trust of
Yep.
leadership, lack of trust and lack of training,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
From leadership on how to do, the dance. So it's easier for me to tell you, to treat you like a robot, to treat them like a robot, and so that we, to try to create this robotic relationship from someone who's like not necessarily, who's not like in the classroom, but feels like they have to do something to satisfy whatever needs, whatever parties or entities. And so I get it. And maybe some of that is, I think some of that can be used, I think, like maybe as like dance moves, but the overall bigger thing should be the approach and the attitude that we are approaching a situation with, rather than just, okay, when A happens, insert B. And then, it's not necessarily just a flow chart, right? And so like, while I understand where that comes from, we need to put in more work to have to talk about the approach. And one last thing on this, it takes time to learn to do this dance, right? It's not like I learned the dance moves. Like think about like think about like any dance move that you learned. Like maybe you just learned the, what are the kids doing nowadays? The floss, right? Or, the hype or whatever. You can learn the dance and do it, but it takes time to do it with like skill, right? And to kind of make it, to internalize it and make it your own. It takes practice in doing that dance a lot of times in different situations to the beat of different songs, right? To really get good at it. As opposed to, what we're trying to do is like, okay, do this robotic dance move, and we're stepping on toes because they're moving in a way that we didn't expect. We don't know how to move any differently, because we haven't really had that practice. So it takes time. It's hard. It's difficult, whether you're in a classroom or you're parenting, and I empathize with that. And you're really struggling, and you are working on your dance. Like that's what's most important. Just like what you said earlier, just like kind of like going back and reflecting, like, man, so many car drives home of just reflecting. Like I wanted to listen to music, but I was so deep in reflection that I just turned it off, because I'm really thinking about, okay, well, yeah, I don't like the way that I handled that. And I remember there were times where I would reflect on what happened, and like maybe like I yelled or it's something like, I don't like the way that we handled that. And I would text my co-teacher too, like we need to be different. Like we need and for a teacher might be texting your co-teacher at the end of the day or end of the night or in the morning, nap time, break time, whatever that time is, having those conversations. And for parents, it might be at the end of the night when you're going to bed together and you're having those reflective conversations as you're turning off the lights. And like, that's what's important, that you're continuously learning and growing. And I always say the goal, like, don't try to be perfectionist. It's not about being perfect. Like that's trying to be perfect, like the perfect parent, the perfect teacher, that is an impossible, standard that doesn't exist. So it's not healthy to try to be perfect and to just beat yourself up and, shame yourself because, you're not perfect. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to improve. I say, don't be a perfectionist, be an improvementist. Be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day.
I love that. And I think that's so helpful for so many parents who beat themselves up for handling things in ways that they recognize are not effective, but not being sure what to do differently and getting down on themselves and feeling guilty. So that idea of, improving and striving for improvement and striving to get better at the dance. That visual is really lovely. And that dance is going to be different depending on our partner too. Like somebody, I have 4 kids, many of the parents listening have multiple kids, and that dance, there may be foundational steps. You're going to have your own little spin and your own unique dynamics for each child. And that adds its own challenge as well. I want to delve into, as we're thinking about this idea of this dance and relationships as foundational, and parents and professionals feeling like doing some reflection, going, man, I'm not really, feeling great about how this is going. I'm not sure how to approach it differently. I'd love to have you talk about some of the places that we as adults go wrong sort of right out of the gate with the assumptions that we make about kids' behavior or how we approach these things, because I think that makes or breaks how we handle something, right? What's in our mind about what we're seeing or experiencing with our kid just totally determines the path that we take with how we approach it. So I'd love to have you speak to that.
Yeah. And I talk about mantras all the time, and one of my favorites, it's a really popular one, that I even use for myself sometimes, is, children aren't giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time.
Yes.
Right. And, really the approach in seeing the misbehavior, them not meeting your expectations, there's some kind of underlying, need or untaught skill, because here's another one, children do well when they can.
That's right.
Right. And it's tough, right? Like I'm right now on the internet, like everything that I'm like, at least right now, this like rotation of content that I'm like talking about, we're talking a lot about like spanking and, hitting children. And there's a lot of controversy in that. And a lot of people, feel a lot of ways about it. And one of the comments, because I'm about to talk about something that you can do different. And this is kind of like the video that's in my head. So it's going to be fun to talk this out, and I'd love to hear you think about it. But one of the things that we do, especially when we rely on like punishments, especially like corporal punishments, is it not only affects the child, but it affects us too, and our mentality and how we approach a situation, and whether we're going to the situation and helping them, or going to the situation and hurting them, right? And a lot of times if we rely on corporal punishment or punishment in general, it is I'm going to tell you once, I might even tell you twice, and if you don't listen to the second time, then I'm gonna hit you, or I'm gonna do some kind of punishment, and I'm gonna make you listen, without really seeing that, okay, why is this child having a hard time with this expectation, right? Child isn't giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. So someone said, they were like, well, I need to hitting them is a lot better than them getting burned with an iron. How some kids just don't get it. If I, tell them not to touch the iron because it's hot, it's better for me to hit them than for them to have permanent damage and touch the iron and get burned. And so that's the way that we're thinking. That's the only 2 choices. Talk to them. If they don't do it, then the punishment's coming, and I'm going to hurt them, right? So that they don't get hurt. But instead, if we thought about it, like, okay, what is my child really needing in this? Like, is looking at it from a child's perspective. Maybe my child is really curious about this tool, this thing that I use all the time, that they see me use all the time. And maybe me saying like, don't touch it, and me putting so much focus on like, don't touch it, don't touch it, don't touch it. Me putting so much focus on it is making them focus on it more, but they're so curious about it. They don't know why they can't touch it. And for a child who's really, most children who really susceptible to their impulse control, like that's really hard for them, not to explore that in some way. How can I help them explore it in a safe way.
Mm-hmm.
A child has a need to, to explore this thing they're curious about. And I have a need for my child to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. All right. So now we're thinking in this process, I have an idea, right? You know, bring the child's like, you really want to touch this iron. You're curious about this iron. And when you are telling them about like their like wants and needs, like they're glued in, like, yeah, I really want to touch it. Like, she's gonna let me touch it. Oh, I'm excited. Yeah, I'm gonna let you touch it. Right now it's off, it's not plugged, so it's not hot. But when we plug it up, it's gonna get really hot. We're gonna touch it together. All right. So watch me plug it up. I'm gonna plug it up. See, it's plugged up, it's gonna get hot. Now you're gonna put your hand here. I'm gonna put my hand on here too, so we can both feel it. And we're gonna talk, and you're gonna talk to them as it gradually gets hot. Like, ooh, you feel it's getting hotter? Ooh, yeah, that's hot, right? Okay, I'm gonna start to take my hand off because it's starting to it's getting too hot for me. Ooh, that's hot. Maybe they might leave their hand for like a second or two longer and they put it on the, ooh, that's hot, right? And so now the child has learned, actually understands that it is hot and that it'll hurt if they're touching it while they're using it, right? And so now the child's actually learned something, as opposed to when you just hit the child for doing it, they didn't learn anything. They're just, maybe they're scared, like, oh, I'm not going to do it around you because like you're going to hurt me. But maybe in a time you're not there, they're curious, they're still going to do it. And the other part to that is maybe they don't take their hand off and they keep it on for, a long time to the point it burns it. Let's say that that's what happens, right? Then, wow, there's something going on here, right? Because my child isn't responding to the normal, maybe there's sensory processing disorder.
That's right. Yep.
Right. And now I have a better understanding of my child and their needs, and I can help them with that. If you just hit them because they're trying to touch it and trying to feed the curiosity, you never figure that out.
Yep.
And you continue to say and create this narrative or reinforce this narrative that, I need to, because they might, stop trying to do because they're afraid of you. They might stop trying to touch it, but you didn't teach them about the actual iron. And so that's not really like, they're not really, in other situations, they may not listen, they may still get burned. You hit them and they still got burned. And then two, you may not, there could be something going on there and you don't figure it out because you have this mentality of, I'm gonna hit them into submission or punish them into submission.
Yeah.
And so that's one example of kind of how like these like punishment, especially the harsh punishments, can affect us and blind us to what our children really need and cause us to not even go through the process of thinking through how to help them. And I get it. It's hard, right? Like most of us did not grow up with that kind of approach. Most of us grew up with the punishment, corporal punishment. Like I got spanked growing up. Like that's what most of us grew up with. And so it's hard. And like a lot of people are saying like, well, what do I do? What do I do? Like, what else can I do? Right. And so you don't have the tools because you never experienced, or you never saw the tools. So you're using the tools that you always saw, and there's epigenetics that play into it too. And so like I get like why it happens. And people who identify that like, oh, this is something I don't want to do, and you're listening to this podcast, you're probably in that category, and you are spanking or using like you're probably in that category of like I don't like it, but I kind of feel like I need to do it. I had no other tools.
Yeah.
And for those people, I'm here for you. Like come to my page, like watch my content. Like I am committed, I am dedicated to breaking these cycles. And I feel like a part of me is really connected to it. I know it happens in a lot of other cultures, but it's really prevalent in the Black community.
Yeah.
And, we, unfortunately, like the narrative is like, we're proud of it. We talk about it. It's like it is a part of our culture, when in reality, and we weren't hitting our children until we came to we were enslaved in America, and we, we wanted to control our kids because we were afraid of what massa might do. And
Right.
so we wanted them to be docile field workers to try to protect them from the, from the oppression,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's tough, it's hard. And and again, I know it's not just people in the Black community.
Right.
Um, right. And it was, Europeans have been hitting their children before they came over to the New World, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I know in the Latino community, and it's something that a lot of us struggle with, but like I'm here for all of you, and I get it's hard. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'll say on that.
Well, there are all of those components of our own experiences, and not just our experiences as kids with our own parents, but even generationally before our parents, our grandparent, right? And I think that the important thing around this conversation, and it's so, like you said, so many things there that were so just valuable and important. I think to just say to everybody listening, this is about an opportunity for growth on all of our parts. We can't change what happened in the past. We can't change the way that many generations ago, things happened in our own family. We can't change the way our parents parented us. We have an opportunity now to understand that in a way that allows us to do something different with our own children, with the children that we're working with professionally. And that's, it's reflecting on the past, it's understanding that to help inform the present. And I think that this issue of these cycles is so critical. So I want to delve into that a little bit more, but I want to go back to this example that you gave with punishment and the iron, because I'm so glad you walked through that, because I think people often say, well, tell me what this looks like give me some concrete examples. And you talked about the corporal punishment, spanking. We could put yelling, in there on sort of another end of that spectrum. A lot of what goes on with kids with more severe developmental disabilities, emotional and behavioral disorders, maybe things like spanking aren't sanctioned in professionally developed behavior plans, but boy, are punishments. You touch that iron, you get close to that door, you do this, and I'm going to take these things away, or you don't get these things,
Yeah.
or, I'm going to grab you. Certainly there is a lot of physical involved in some of those plans. It may not be spanking, but it's physical. And to your point about that may stop the child from doing that in the moment, but it's not teaching them anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece that's so important. And how we come at that teaching part is what you were sharing around what's in our mind, the getting curious about it. Because to me, that perspective shift, when the kid keeps going for the iron, and our perspective on it is they're just trying to be naughty and make me angry. They're just trying to get my attention. They're trying to disrupt my day. They're trying to do this to me. When we're in that frame of mind, we're going to respond more out of that frustration, that anger, that just stop giving me a hard time. But when we can shift our perspective to the orientation of the child and say, what might be going on in my child's mind right now that this keeps going on? Boy, does that change everything then in terms of how we can think about and approach. And I think that perspective shift, getting out of our own adult perspective and trying to get into a child's perspective, because we treat kids like they're little adults, right? They're not thinking about these things the way we are.
Yeah.
And when we can approach it from that way, I think that softens us. It allows us to take a breath. It gives us some space to think about it in a way other than this child is just trying to ruin my morning.
Right. 100%. And and even thinking about where a lot of that self-talk comes from too, and really trying to, it's work. It is rewiring your brain to create, different stories, and to talk and say, different mantras, right? A lot of us, even grew up with mantras that were you know, where I to not emotionally healthy to say the least,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I know we're talking about, I know I keep on bringing up like corporal punishments because it's just something that's on my
That's
mind
okay.
today. But like one of the things that I grew up hearing is like a hard head makes a soft behind, right? And
Mm,
another, and it like repeated
mhm,
to me, like brainwashing, right? And
mhm,
then, my my girlfriend, something that she said that they like in her family, one of like a mantra that was always said is like, we whoop the kids,
mhm,
right? And that's they would joke about it and
mhm,
and laugh about it. And I think people have different kind of mantras or different things that their parents maybe repeated to them.
mhm.
That now is a part of it's a part of us, right? It's a part of our wiring in our brain. It's a part of our self-talk. And so we have to, and it's years of that kind of talk, of that wiring in our brain from times when our brains were really starting to form,
Right.
so it's deeply ingrained.
Right.
So we have to put in so much more work
Mhm.
to change that. But by listening to podcasts and feeding, not just listening to podcasts, reading books, being around and really immersing yourself in an environment where there are these more positive parenting perspectives. When I say positive parenting, I don't mean one
No,
specific
right.
genre or like,
Yeah.
because there's all these, but I mean just mean the more progressive
Mhm,
kind of parenting that we're talking about, as opposed to the traditional
mhm,
of fear and
mhm,
control based tactics.
mhm.
um, Surrounding yourself, immersing yourself in the positive parenting kind of environments, so that you do start to rewire your brain slowly over time, right? And practicing that dance, and
Mhm.
reflecting, and when you make mistakes, and apologizing, repairing where needed, and learning and trying to do better, right?
Mhm.
And that is what my and that's why, like, I have the Patreon, not to do the plug right now, but
Mhm.
that's why I created the Patreon, as like a way to kind of bring people into this community
Yeah.
where weekly you're a part of conversations like this
Mhm.
with people with different expertise, and also having access to one-on-one coaching with me periodically, so that because it's a lot of the things, it's not just like the with punishments, it's applying punishments is a lot easier, because it's
Mhm.
like you do something, all that requires for the punishment to happen is like you do something that I don't like,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to do the punishment. It doesn't matter what it is. It's kind of just a blanket punishment of whatever. And it doesn't really require a lot of thought. It doesn't really require you to ask yourself, like, what could my child be experiencing? It doesn't really require you to listen to your
Mhm.
child, to have a conversation, to
Mhm.
see their behaviors, communication,
Mhm.
to be attuned to their emotions. It doesn't really require those things. And those things are hard,
Yep.
and are different for every child, and not every behavior means the same thing
That's right.
in every situation for every child. So that is tough.
Mhm.
And people ask, like, well, okay, what do I do instead?
Mhm.
I think a lot of times, like, they're wanting like something like like what punishment does is just a
Yeah.
blanket, like,
Yeah.
okay, so what's the magic quick
Mhm.
fix for everything, because I have this belt and I can use it for every situation.
Mhm.
So I need you to give me a tool that I can use for every situation.
Mhm.
But that's not what it is, and that's not how any relationship should be.
That's right.
Uh,
Well, and I think the community piece is important because, as you said, this takes practice. It's a building awareness, right? I know that there are people listening to this right now who are having some ahas and becoming aware of some things for themselves and their own history and how that played into it. And we need support around that community, especially if you are working on breaking some of these cycles that have been in your family. Family may not be the community that you need. You may have, your siblings, your parents, they may not get it, and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And so for people to have like-minded people who are thinking about and practicing these things and wrestling with it and understanding that inherently it's messy. It's messy. And, I always say to parents, we screw it up more than we get it right. In baseball, a 300 batting average is like amazing. And that means they hit the ball 3 out of 10 times, right? It's like, if we can think about that same, give ourselves that same space and grace for going, yeah, this is a practice. I'm working on getting better. I'm becoming aware of some of these patterns, of some of these things. I'm not feeling good about how this is working. I'm going to strive to think about and do these things differently. And then consuming information and surrounding yourself by people who can nurture that. I think that's so critical.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And just, no, I know I said this already, but it's going to take time.
Yeah.
Um, it's going to take time, but it is so worth it. And kind of go back to something you said earlier in terms of like just the generational, work that we're doing. The more that, you grow, like, yes, you're not going to be, there's no reality where anyone is going to become the perfect parent, but
Right.
you can improve. And the more that you improve and grow within yourself, the more that you're able to give to your children, and the more that they can grow and more emotionally healthy that they can be. And so when they're at your age, they're farther along in their journey, right? And so they're able to give more. I think about it, the metaphor that I use, it's kind of like, you know, like that the first iPhone, right?
Right.
And you might right now you might be taking a huge leap, and you're going from, maybe you grew up with spanking and you're like, I'm not trying to spank, punish, shame my child at all. I see them as a full person, and I want to help them, grow, learn and grow. And instead of just them trying to create obedient robots, I want to elicit cooperation. We're both working together to meet these goals. And that's huge, right? And so, like that's a big leap in advancement and technology, right? And I would think of it as like the first iPhone, right? And when the first iPhone came out, it was groundbreaking. Like, wow, like it's amazing how powerful this is. But that doesn't mean that that's the end, right? You continuously improve on that and improve from generation to generation to generation, right? And but the improvement can't happen without that first iPhone, right? Build off of that. And so you might be the first iPhone amongst maybe a family of pagers, right? And so you might be feeling a little alone, right? But just know that, one, there's not, you're not going to be like, the fact that you are the first iPhone is enough. And that as you're learning and growing and improving, that they're going to build off of that. And then their children are going to build off of that, and their children are going to build off that. When you're raising your children, you're raising your children's children, and your children's children.
Oh, the impact of that for future generations that we'll never even meet is so powerful. As we wrap up here, I'd like you to comment on one more thing, and that is for parents or teachers or other professionals who are listening who are like, man, I want to make some change in this, but my child's already getting older. I haven't been doing this in the way that I felt good about for a long time. It's probably too late for my kids. Maybe a parent who's saying, well, my kid's 16 now, or well, my kid's already, 10 or whatever. What would you say to parents who are feeling like, man, I really screwed this up and, it's too late?
It's never too late to repair. And, even, the older they are, I'd say, like, the more they may be even able to process kind of what you're doing, as you're maybe you even have more of a conversation about what you experience, and like really take that apology that you give to heart, and say, like, I'm really trying to do something, I really want to do something different, right? I'm learning and growing. I know I've been doing things a certain way for your entire life up until now, and I apologize. I'm sorry about that. And I want to do better. And so, like, I am, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm reading books. I signed up to, this community. I'm really trying to learn better so that I can I can know better how to support you and to help you through the things that you're working through, that you're, challenged with.
Mm,
Um, and I hope you forgive me, but just know that I'm here. I'm committed to do the work.
mhm.
Um, and you know, especially the children who are older, 10, 11, 12, 16, like they're going to remember. That's a huge conversation they're going to
Mhm.
remember, and may even take that on as
Yep.
they get older, or maybe even right now in the moment, like, maybe it's not too late for me to change
Mhm.
either. I mean, there's something like different that I can do. Like, this is my parent who is, have decades of experience in life, and they're admitting that it's okay to be wrong, that they're not perfect, that they're still learning and growing. Like, wow, like maybe I can do that
Mm,
too. Like maybe
mhm,
like that's something that I should think about for myself. Um, and the older they are, I think the more capacity they have to kind of wrestle with that, and to make that decision, or at the very least remember it for later as other things happen and
mhm,
they decide, to make that, to make that decision. But if you're just like, it's too late, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing,
mhm.
I'm, perfect parent who can never admit that I'm wrong, then, how can we expect our children to admit they're wrong and apologize and learn and grow and change when the things that they're doing aren't serving them, too? And why wouldn't we just expect them to have the same approach? It's too late. I'm already 16, like
Right.
too deep into this. Let me just keep on going, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I would say to that.
Mm, beautiful. So beautiful. So many great things in there. You and I could talk for hours. I know that we need to wrap up. I want to make sure that you have a chance to share with people where they can find out more about you and the things that you are offering online.
Find me on Instagram, Mr. Chazz, just Mr. Chazz, MRCHAZZ. And you can find me on TikTok, Mr. Chazz, Mr. Chazz, obviously all one word. You can find me on Facebook, Mr. Chazz, space, Mr. Chazz. And you can also, I'm a little bit on LinkedIn. You can find me as Mr. Chazz, of course.
Mhm,
You can find my podcast, Mr. Chazz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching
mhm,
podcast. And you can sign up to the Patreon, the community that I talked about with the weekly sessions,
mhm,
also access to one-on-one coaching. There's different tier levels depending on what you're looking for, and depending on, what your budget is, from as low as $5 to, as
mhm.
much as $200, depending on what you're looking for. But that's www.patreon.com/Mr. Chazz. And that's where you
Awesome.
can find me.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to have all those links with the show notes so that people can easily access those. Can't wait for your book that you're working on.
Yeah.
You and I will stay in touch. And when that is ready to come out, we're going to have you back on the show and we're going to dive into that and let people know about the book. Mr. Chazz, thank you so much for spending time with me today, with us today. This was really fantastic. Great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks, Nicole. Have a great day.
And thanks
Bye,
to all
everyone.
of you. Yeah, thanks to
Yeah.
all of you as always for listening. We'll catch you back here for our next episode of the Better Behavior Show.